The Life Sciences DNA podcast is sponsored by Agilicium Labs, a collaborative space where Agilicium works with its clients to co-develop and incubate POCs, products, and solutions. To learn how Agilicium Labs can use the power of its generative AI for life sciences analytics, visit them at labs.agilicium.com. Sri, we've got Shweta Manjara on the show today. Who is she?
Shweta Manjara is a global strategy and market leader for life sciences at Google Cloud, where she helps pharmaceutical, biotech, medtech, and diagnostic companies transform how they discover, develop, and deliver therapies using cloud, AI, and data-driven tools. A long-time commercial executive across digital health, pharma, medical devices, and biotech, she previously led technology-enabled market growth and personalized healthcare initiatives at Genentech. Her work contributed to major partnerships as well as the Flatiron Health acquisition. She also serves on boards of OrthoFix and RxHealth.
And I'm sure people know the name Google Cloud, but where does it fit in the world of life sciences?
Google Cloud has become a strategic infrastructure and an AI partner for the life sciences industry. It helps organizations move from siloed legacy systems to more modern data-driven platforms that can help speed discovery and improve patient impact. In practical terms, that means secure, compliant cloud environments and specialized tools so that pharma, biotech, medtech, and diagnostic companies can integrate massive amount of multimodal data sets, run large-scale computational workloads, and apply advanced analytics and generative AI across R&D, clinical development, and commercial operations. Google Cloud collaborates across several ecosystems, including regulators, health systems, and partners to ensure that AI-enabled solutions are trustworthy, explainable, and aligned with real-world clinical and business needs in life sciences.
And what are you hoping to hear from her today?
I'm really hoping to get her perspective around how AI is changing the landscape in life sciences. It's not just theory, but how do you really implement practical AI use cases, but also to get good ROI and return from each of those use cases. And I think that she, with her wide experience as both a practitioner and somebody who's a technologist, can really talk about the journey of how you bring AI and AI use cases to several of the customer segments we're talking about here.
Well, before we begin, I want to remind our audience that they can stamp on the latest episodes of Life Sciences DNA by hitting the subscribe button. If you enjoy the content, be sure to hit the like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to listen to us on the go by downloading an audio-only version of the show from your preferred podcast platform. With that, let's welcome Shweta to the show.
Hi, Shweta. Welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you at Life Sciences DNA podcast. Shweta, you have a wonderful journey and background and your passion for life sciences. It'll be great to hear your journey before you joined Google and your role at Google. That'll be great.
Wonderful, Shri. Thank you so much for having me here today. As you shared, I'm Shweta Manjara. I've been here at Google for about coming on to 8 years, and I lead the life sciences practice and strategy here at Google Cloud. And my career has been defined by a single mission, which has really been around how do we connect the dots with the healthcare and life sciences industry, particularly around how do we focus on the breakthroughs that we see in the scientific industry, research, etc., and how do we bring transformational technology to the industry and bridging that. I was going to say gap, but there's no longer a gap because I think it is now working in partnership, or we are now moving in that direction. And my background actually before this has been coming from the healthcare and life sciences industry. I came from Roche, in Genentech. For those who have been, if I'm talking to partners in the US, I say Genentech, otherwise I say Roche, so it depends on who I'm talking to. I've also spent time in the healthcare systems at organizations like the Cleveland Clinic and at Scripps Clinic, as well as in nonprofit biotech. So really have spent the time on the other side of the table being pitched to from various technology organizations in different parts of different roles and different business units in the healthcare ecosystem on how does technology play a role And so it's been fantastic being here on the Google side, really thinking about how do we best apply AI. And so I'm very unapologetically an optimist about AI, but a very methodical one. So the work that I'm focused on here is how do we move our industry past experimental fatigue into one of real world ROI, which I'm really looking forward to talking to you about today.
No, that's a wonderful segue. That's a fascinating topic and conversation to be had. So let's start exploring it. As you know, with Google, you have different parts of what you do. Including the alphabets. The mothership having a lot of good background in life sciences. So maybe it'll be great to start with what is your mission for this year within Google Cloud, and really explore that. How do you take that and move from experimentation to scale? But it'll be good to kind of frame it from what's the mission within Google right now.
Our mission is really how do we support the missions of the industry? And in this case, healthcare and life science organizations are now looking at how do they best serve their customers, whether that is the end patient, the healthcare provider, the researcher, and all of the above. And so our focus is how do we take our technologies and our capabilities to support the organizations. And so in one of our most recent surveys that we focused on for Google Cloud, 73% of healthcare and life science organizations are already seeing return on investment for at least one of these AI use cases. So a lot of these, our mission is help the industry focus on productivity, on customer experiences, on their business growth. And that's very broad, I understand, so we can get into the specifics. But when I talk to the ecosystem, when I say customer experience, that can mean a variety of things depending on who you're talking to. When I'm talking to pharmaceutical organizations or science organizations, customer experience is very different, because customer experience can actually mean how do your employees and your researchers and your scientists work with and experience the technology tools and the capabilities within their own organization. So when we're talking about ROI, or the return on investment of AI use cases, it's not necessarily just what's happening from a pharma company and to the external. It's really about how do we create productivity and efficiency even within an organization. And so we're already seeing organizations that are moving beyond simple Gen AI assistants to really complex agentic workflows. And so it's very exciting, because now we're moving from traditional R&D to very much what I would call, research and prediction. So our focus is how do we help turn, if we're going to talk about the drug development part of the life science industry, how do we turn a $2.3 billion high risk gamble industry, right, for a particular drug, into what is more of a calculated forecast, and how can we support that endeavor? And I know that sounds like a very ambitious goal, but there are pieces that we can help through that to really move the needle on that.
No, that is, and there are two parts to that 2.3 billion, right? One is the target identification or the drug discovery side, and then the other part of it is the acceleration of the clinical development process. Maybe why don't we pick a use case in either one, and just why don't you share your experience on what have you experienced in impacting that 2.3 billion? What was the before case and what was the after case, and how was that journey? So why don't we start? You could pick either discovery or clinical development to start first.
We're going to think of a couple of use cases, and I think the best is to anchor it in something real, right? So we are seeing transformative use cases across the value chain. Maybe I'll give you something that I think I'm being approached about almost every day is regulatory, right? In regulatory compliance, there is, and I think this is maybe a slightly more, I'm going to call it adjacent, but still life sciences, is a great example is Elanco, which Elanco has developed actually a homegrown agent. and Elenco.ai, and in which that they actually reduced their task time by 70%. And were already able to demonstrate that they were able to save a little bit over $2 million just last year. And just even in a very homegrown agent, very small scale to begin with. And this is this is for animal health. This was a small start for them, and now it's continuing to grow. So this is just a couple of use cases as we're starting to see them. But
And what was the before? What was the process before, and how were they able to save 70% or $2 million?
Right. Let me move for what was before, right? The situation before, and I'm also going to move to a couple of other examples beyond Elanco, but historically, right, we've seen drug discovery that's relying on mass screening. They're testing thousands of random compounds, and I'm going to say random is loosely, right, because of course there is a decent bit of rigor that is going into this. But we're still hoping for a hit, right? With some sort of educated rigor that's going into this. But it is to some degree a trial and error approach. We're looking at, and it's taking, lots of PhDs over a decade, billions of dollars. We know we'll have all of these stats, right? You have this information, I have this information of all of the amount of resources that go into this. So we're seeing that regulatory reviews have been, similarly also archaic. So you asked me to give an example from a drug discovery side, also from a regulatory side. This is what we've seen from before. Manual, error-prone, lots of human errors sifting through fragmented data sets. And we've seen a lot of our brightest minds, particularly in a lot of the examples that I'm going to give you, where we've seen the challenges have been leaders are coming and saying that we're seeing some of our brightest minds effectively acting as high-level clerical workers because they're spending more time on data reconciliation than some of the high-level scientific strategy for which they were hired for. So with the use of some of these AI tools, now we're starting to see it's allowed some of these companies to replace, I would call it like a technological mosaic with a little bit more of a predictive engine. So the example coming back to Elanco, now I'm starting to see, if we're going to talk about lab notebooks, I'm starting to see scientists are now starting to spend, they're starting to spend 60% of their week. I've seen scientists spend 60% of their week harmonizing data between different lab notebooks. It's really such a tragedy of so much time that's being spent. And now we're seeing various pharmaceutical companies, Moderna being one of them, where they actually leverage some of our capabilities. Looker being one of them, which is just for some of the audience. Looker actually acts like a data storyteller for businesses. So it turns a lot of complex data into something that's a little bit more easy to read, a little bit more of a dashboard. So we've seen organizations now use some of these capabilities, some of these AI tools to make it a little bit more, make these dashboards and integrate these diverse data sets so that instead of hunting for data, researchers or scientists are able to actually harmonize and look at this information and analyze it rather than search for the information.
I mean, Shweta, this is a perfect use case, right? Where AI takes away the mundane tasks and activities and then relieves the high-skilled workers to do much more of thoughtful scientific work. So absolutely with you on that. But as you start to implement this thing walk me through it. It must not have been easy because there's a lot of change involved in it. People who are the doers really take pride in the work they do. And so to give it out to some other tool must have been quite a challenge. So walk me through how was that journey? You walked in and said, "Hey, this is 70% it's going to save," but I don't think anybody came out and said, "I'm going to sign up first." So walk me through the whole process. What happened? What was some resistances, if there were any, and then how did that journey get to a good part to the end?
You're spot on because it is, if I'm making it sound like if I'm making it sound rosy, it's not, right? It is certainly a journey that every organization is going on and at various speeds. The biggest hurdle isn't actually the implementation of these AI models. It has actually been the initial data fragmentation and the data foundations. So as I mentioned, right, these life science organizations are historically, they're technological mosaic, right? Their data is sitting in different silos, and there's using LIMS systems and these electronic notebooks, and there's these clinical databases on the sides. And so you know that from your background, right? There's data sitting in everywhere. And so uh the first step is you have this unified voice challenge, which I think is first you have to figure out if you have 10,000 pages of documentation, how do you first get everything to have a consistent narrative and a consistent voice? And that's the first part. And so to solve for that, before you even implement any of these Gen AI or agents or any such, first you have to solve for the data fabric, right? Which is, and again, we offer these tools to standardize all of these messy data into these single searchable sources. So I have said this many a times, and I know I've been quoted on this, but I'll still say it again. You have to fix your foundation before you build a skyscraper, right? You cannot make a skyscraper on a swamp. So before you try to push forward to build, implement any of these AI tools, you have to have your data foundation set. And I often actually point to a really very great example is we've worked with Servier out in France, and they're a great example of uh, a model of how they've overcome this. They actually identified not one, not two, but they identified 60 generative AI use cases in their R&D cycle that they wanted to address. And if you can believe it, they didn't pick one silo. They actually looked at their entire pipeline. And so their initial project wasn't, how do we implement all of these AI tools? It was, here's all of the use cases that we want to apply. Now here's all of our data. Here are all of our silos. First, let's figure out all of our silos and fix that before we can get to the unified voice and then apply all of your tools. And that was the first approach that they took. So to answer your question around, what were some of the challenges? It's first having for companies to first identify that it's not just buying some technology and pushing it into their company. It's setting your data foundation appropriately, right? And first acknowledging, in some cases, I think that there's an acknowledgement problem, and then actually addressing the actual data fragmentation aspect of it.
Shweta, you talked about bringing the data and data standardization is a very critical part. I absolutely agree with you. As you know, organizations have been trying to bring the data together for time immemorial within the life sciences. It's a problem well understood, but you've been having some successes on accelerating that journey. So walk me through that journey. Where do we start in that data standardization? How do you bring these troops together? How do you create that one voice or one standardization, which you talked about? Because that's so critical. As you said, without a good foundation, you don't have a good skyscraper. So we don't want to have the swamp. How do we drain the swamp?
Adoption is first built on our trust and transparency, right? Adoption. This is not a technology challenge. First, it is about people and the people that work in your organization, the people that are working with you. So first, it is adoption of any new tools is about trust and transparency. So we can't ask our world-class researcher to suddenly use a tool that they don't trust or the data privacy of or the outputs of and say, just here's a new tool and take it and run with it. So we tackle this by providing, and depends on, what the tool is and what part we're talking about. We provide HIPAA compliant, a fully governed platform. And we have what is not the black box approach, but what we call the glass box approach. So our Agentic Gen AI generates fully cited approaches. So what that actually means that if there's anything that is coming out of any of our agents, you can actually trace it back to its source. And if you remember, if you see or you hear anybody from Google talking, we won't ever say, right, myself included, this is just 100%, now just let the agents and the AI run everything. Human is always in the loop, right? And so we want the scientists to be in the loop, right? But we are moving away from this mentality of we want these highly skilled workers, as we were talking about earlier in the regulatory context, to be the authors, to shifting the mindsets to be the reviewers. So if we're talking about now scientists, you want the scientists to, because of the glass box, you want them to be able to see the receipts. This now helps people move away from skepticism to partnerships. And so this is why I'm saying for adoption, you have to have that trust and transparency. So I wouldn't be Google if I didn't say, right, we do that in two ways. Secure infrastructure, right? So we're not just handing over a model, right? So before any of that AI magic happens, we do, we use a data fabric, we unify the data, everything that we talked about earlier, right? Because if your data isn't clean and secure, your AI is not going to be able to be adopted or scale. The other part is we have to think about that glass box approach. So not only just the cited responses, but not only when you have these scientists or these highly skilled workers seeing the receipts and being able to follow the trail, we want the scientists to be able to see the trail, but you also want future people to also see, what did that scientist do? How can I be able to trust what has been done so I can replicate it? So the community can build trust in these new tools because they want to adopt what they can replicate.
So you talked about the journey, which is trust, and then human in the loop, get them comfortable, create the data and data foundation. And as you start to go down this journey, you mentioned ROI a few times. And ROI, it depends on the process. If you go too small, then the ROI is productivity, small chunk. If you take much bigger, ROI is much more about outcome and output. Walk me through a journey or use case. How do you approach that, ROI for your customers? What kind of journey do you walk them through to get to an ROI? Because it's something every one of my listeners are looking at. How do you justify that ROI to either senior management or to themselves to make sure that they're getting the right implementation funding?
So Shri, we work with life science organizations that are small, medium, and large, and that we work with pharmaceutical, biotech, diagnostics labs, medical manufacturers, devices, etc. We have to realize that realizing real ROI is in de-risking science, right? It's not about reducing people or shifting people here to there. So when you're talking about a large organization, like a large pharma that has data, but they're struggling with silos, you're thinking about, that's what they're thinking about. They're thinking about they're thinking about the data silos. And so ROI is going to be coming from, how do we harmonize the information and be able to elicit insights from the data that we have, right? I think gone are the days of, I need to buy more data. I need to get more information. In fact, it's now these large organizations are, how can I make sense of the information that I have, elicit patterns that are sitting within the walls of my organization. Meanwhile, I'm seeing, for example, early stage biotechs that are already digital first, their ROI is actually coming from needing more secure compliant foundations. I think I wouldn't call this an early stage organization, but Recursion Pharmaceuticals is a really, really fantastic, AI first company where they're processing 20 terabytes of data a week. They don't need fewer people, but they need their people to see the patterns in the petabytes of data faster than humanly possible. So the lesson is, I will say that AI is a strategic upgrade, right? And so that is what I've seen is part of the ROI is the type of organization and what stage of organization that you're in, right? What stage of your development that you're in.
Sure, that it's very important, right? You said human in the middle and looking at patterns, but when you have 20 petabytes of data and AI is using it, how do you really trust and verify what is going on? Is AI hallucinating? It's giving me a pattern. I can't go back and verify 20 petabytes of data and information. So walk me through. This is a classic problem, right? That now AI is so superior in its pattern recognition that the human is just has two choices: accept it or question it. But then they don't have the tools to saying why it's right or wrong. So this is a great use case for you to walk through. How does one build that trust of that inference and insight which is coming on when you're really looking at large volumes of data?
So I'm going to give a more, this is in a response that's even beyond our industry, right? This is how Google looks uh, at data beyond the life science industry, right? Which is the responsibility that uh, technology companies have, or Google has, is in we have shifted and towards this dynamic monitoring with AI specific transparency. So we don't just have to, blindly trust the privacy policy. We use specific tools to verify, right, how this is being used, right? And so it's around AI data grounding, right? This is about how do we look at the transparency reports. So I think a lot of this is also based on being able to understand what is under the hood. And I think that's what you're getting at. And did I understand the question correctly? Right? So I think that's a big piece of it. But again, I want to come back to this point that you're making, Shri, is it's not just about the technology piece. There are cultural shifts that are happening inside organizations today. I have the ability or have the privilege, I'm going to say, I talk to people, the scientists, I talk to the C-suite, and I also often get to talk to the boards, right, who are trying to understand how to shift and move their companies. And it is really, I can't emphasize enough, but it's not about the technology. It is the biggest shift is how do we shift the culture of the organization? Because it's no longer that, oh, the IT people are the technology people of your company. I say we are now all technology people now. And I think that has been the biggest shift.
No, I can't agree with you more. But that cultural shift is difficult, right? It is each individual is now having to think that they could be a vibe coder, they could be somebody who could be a strategist who could brainstorm with the bot and figure out what needs to be done, can formulate good emails in a much better way than they did before. But it's upon each and every one of them. So walk me through how do you start to do this cultural shift? Everybody knows that it's a big cultural shift because you're going away from innovation being in a silo or an IT department to innovation being ubiquitous with everybody, and everybody is empowered to doing what they need to do. But it's not easy. And again, I want to know, are there some best practices on how you start doing this stuff? Maybe some guidelines to walk people through this journey.
If we're going to move away from being a clerical mindset to more of a strategic mindset, that means if we're talking about a life science organization, we are moving away from mass screening towards like rational design. So if we're talking about a scientist, let's talk about it very specifically. If we're talking about somebody sitting in a lab, we want those people, those highly skilled people who have devoted their careers in science, to move away from thinking that they need to do the manual labor to the people who direct the technology to still do that same science. How do we shift that, right? So organizations have to stop seeing AI as a way to, you know, as an efficiency measure, and really look at this as a tool to de-risk the clients itself so that you can allow the talent to focus on solving some of the world's most difficult problems that they've originally been hired in your company to do, right? And I think it is a mindset different. It is a difference in how you think about your mind, about about your teams. But again, it comes back that somebody who is a scientist, somebody who is, who is a medical writer sitting in your organization, every single person, if you think about them as a technology person, that suddenly shifts the way you think about how you use these tools and what your role becomes. If I'm somebody who's writing a, clinical trial protocol, now suddenly I'm not just the person who's copying and pasting. Now I'm reviewing the first draft that has been collated for me by these AI tools and making sure, right? And ensuring that these are the right, these are the right protocols and editing that version. But now I reduce so much time because now we're not, I'm not making errors from all the copying and pasting in different documents. So I think I think we need to see at a larger level organizations to stop seeing stop seeing AI as just an efficiency tool, but rather a strategic upgrade for de-risking the science and how we see this as part of the workflow overall. When I was working in the healthcare industry, we used to see technology and innovation as your side project, meaning if there was ever any budget cuts, that was one of the first places that you would cut because it wasn't part of the core budget. Now I think we see technology as part of, that is part of the core of how we're moving forward in the industry.
Yeah. And you said it right. It's a mindset shift. Does that happen on a team level, a company level, an individual level? Or how do you, you work with many size organizations. Is there a kind of a playbook which you can adopt to get this, humans to shift to this new mindset?
It has to happen at all levels. And as we were talking about earlier, these things don't happen from bottoms up and top down only. It has to happen from both ways. You need to see your leadership, supporting the use of these technologies. You need to see those who are the doers also experimenting with these technologies. And at a business unit level, right, as a department level, you have to be shifting. I also talk a lot about it's not just about the technology, but it's also how teams are. And I know every organization talks about celebrate, fail fast, fail forward. But if I were to challenge, how do you in your own organization, when you test out a new technology and it doesn't work, is that team member being dinged on their annual reviews? Or are you somehow rewarding them because they tried something different? It is a cultural way that you have to think in your business. That are you incentivizing people to try something different, right? To try a pilot, to try to scale something. And so this is what I mean by it's at an individual level, it is at a department or business unit level. And of course, there's nothing like it if you can see your CEO and your C-suite using these tools, which I am starting to see particularly in large pharmaceutical organizations. I'm starting to see where I'm hearing, oh, our CEO is using XYZ tools already in their, ExCom meetings, which I love to hear about. And they're getting very savvy on using these different tools themselves, which is always a great way that inspires their own employees, right?
No, no, absolutely. It's a change in a change mindset. But let's come back to a little bit of a technology piece. We didn't touch too much about the evolution of agentic architecture. We always talked about human in the middle, making that scientist better. But now with agentic architectures, you're empowering decision making to now agents, in the workflow. Walk me through what's going on with that journey. Is that being viewed skeptically, or is it being adopted because now you're having AI more empowered than before?
I think we are moving and we're entering an era of agents moving into a digital assembly line. So for this year, we are expecting a massive explosion of multi-agent systems, right? And I think some of the biggest ROI, as evidenced by our survey that we published, it's going to be in documentation, right? Real-time documentation, low-hanging fruit, collating information that exists in a much more organized manner. But what I see in the next couple of years, rational design is going to be moving into the industry standard, right? Shrinking regulatory response time, being able to predict what are regulatory bodies going to be asking for. How do we, suddenly if you have a question from a regulatory body, you don't have to ruin everybody's weekend to quickly respond within that, 36-hour, 48-hour time period. You predict, right? If you have this prediction, then you also have the capability to pull that information together and where to get that information in a much, much more coherent workflow manner, right? If we're talking about 12, 24, 36 months, I think then we're going to be moving into where we're going to have a lot more of this to be a little bit more autonomous in terms of compliance. We're looking at collapsed timeline where we're going to be able to, not entirely, but start directionally being able to see that we are collapsing timelines from where we are from a discovery to where we are to patient access. Again, it's still going to take a lot longer to be able to point backwards and say this is how this technology, because this is we are not in an unregulated environment. Fully acknowledge we are in a regulated industry. It will take several years for us to be able to point back and say these are how these tools impacted. But I think directionally we will be able to show how these agentic tools have been able to directionally collapse these timelines from discovery to patient access. So fundamentally, I think these tools are going to be changing how medical innovation is going to be done.
Yeah, and I know we're coming to the end of our session, but it'd be good to say we were here 3 years from now. What do you predict would be the state of adoption of AI in life sciences? Paint me a picture of the future. What would it look like? In terms of type of teams, type of agents, type of compliance related stuff.
There's so many ways that we can go in this in the future. Right now, right now, let me paint the picture for right now because then I can paint where we're going. If we're already seeing in such a short time in which we're seeing this technology come out and this technology move so fast in healthcare and life sciences, if we're already seeing agents creating return on investment in product innovation and design by 28%, 26% increase in return on investment for automated document processing. For life sciences specifically, 19% of medical imaging recognition and inventory tracking and production planning is 18%. That's all in our publication that we talked about before. If that's already happening in a very, very short amount of time, what is happening in the future is, it is incredible. We have a partner by the name of Castor in the life sciences clinical trial space. And I'm seeing already in the future where they are looking at how do you use AI to enable a digital assembly line for life sciences to have a self-driving clinical trial to be the norm. So Castor is already looking at high-risk R&D clinical trials, and how do you calculate and collapse those timelines? How do you collapse those clinical timelines with the use of these self-driving clinical trials? Because they are looking at how do you automate some of the more labor-intensive, error-prone parts of clinical research using AI. So Castor's goal is how do you reduce time and cost for bringing a new drug to market, and they support different pharma companies. And I'm thinking, Shri, if organizations like Castor are already doing that today, your ask of what are we going to see in a couple of years from now? I think the possibilities are going to be endless. And so if we're in such a short time, we're seeing such great ROI. Our hope is from Google Cloud is that we continue to support organizations like Castor and many of the organizations that I shared with you today, because I think forget about 2, 3, 5 years from now, I think we're going to continue to see ROI and changes even every 6 months from now. So I look forward to, be having this conversation again in 1 year or in 6 months, and I'm sure we'll even have more to talk about.
No, this has been fantastic. I think we really explored quite a number of activities, but I think my key takeaway is definitely try to get the right foundation before you can build the building. I think it's really a good hard knock lesson to have there, and then it's about the people and change, and it's not about the technology. So, Shweta, really appreciate your time today. This was very insightful. And thank you again for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Sri, that was a very interesting conversation. What did you think?
It's really fascinating. As she said, one of the biggest points in AI success is the foundation, and building a good, strong data foundation was very critical to any AI implementation and success. And she talked a lot about that, about the data fabric and how do you bring that together. I think the second component, which was really interesting, is it's not about technology, it's about the humans. And how do you have the humans adopt this new technology? And she did hit upon the change management. What was interesting is change management had to come both from top and bottom, but really it had to be intrinsic to every team out there. And it was really fascinating to hear that journey of really fail fast. How do you build a culture of fail fast? I found that very fascinating because it's truly counter to performance-based cultures, which we're all used to from a management standpoint. How do you reward, the experimentation mindset and the ability to fail and learn? Those are new skills which need to be developed from an organization standpoint. So it was great to hear her perspectives around that.
She talked about this survey you did, and we'll link it in the show notes. But did it surprise you to hear that people are already seeing an ROI on their investment in AI?
Where people are very demonstrative in terms of how they make an impact on people's lives, how do they remove that mundane tasks, make them do high value stuff, there people are seeing ROI. But it's a change management culture. People who haven't figured out how to make that change happen are seeing quite a bit of chasm between what the potential is and what they're actually achieving. So I see a heavy dichotomy between the early adopters. It's like a skill. The people who have adopted the skill better are seeing return on investments. People who are taking time to adopt that skill take time to realize the benefit and value.
To that end, she talked about scientists spending 60% of their time harmonizing data between their different lab notes and spending more time on data reconciliation than on analyzing it in a high level strategy. Is that underappreciated? I think there may be a perception that we plug in AI and it's going to be a black box that spits out new drugs we couldn't have thought of. And instead, the real payoff, at least now, is coming from getting your high value workers to do high value work.
People are redefining how work gets done. Right. Previously, work came in, we did all of the work, and then it's 80% perspiration, 20% inspiration. You did all the hard work, and then the inspiring work got less and less time. I think now with AI, we're able to flip that, where hopefully we're spending more time in that inspiration than in the perspiration side of work efforts. But but with that said, it's change management, right? Where does that inspiration and perspiration chasm exist, and how do you make people, give away that task and activity to a machine? And she talked about that. The whole idea is how do you build that trust? Because you can't make that change happen if you don't have trust in the infrastructure. But again, to build trust, you have to experiment, you have to learn and give feedback. And so it's a change management journey. But she's spot on. More and more as people think on how you could do more high value work, the more benefit and ROI you're going to get from AI, at least in the short term.
We've talked a lot about the issue of change management, and she put it in terms of changing that clerical mindset to a strategic mindset. But how much of a mindset change do you think we need with the financial decision makers within biopharma appreciating that return on investment as opposed to it coming in the form of, what she said, reducing headcount.
Yeah, I think it's marrying top-down ROI with actual impact-based ROI. I think one needs to really look not at a mini project and saying, okay, I removed 30% of the task and therefore I've got to do something within that group, to really taking a look at the outcomes measure, which is what she said. Can I do lesser clinical trials and can I get to this in a much better way, so that I can impact better outcomes. I think measuring what matters in the long term is what's going to get you the fundamental shift in the ROI versus just measuring what is in front of you, which is a small POC or a pilot or a task automation. So,
And when you asked her about agentic tools and looking out 10 years down the road, she talked about AI becoming more autonomous and really shrinking the time from development to patient access. How long do you think it'll take us to get there?
I mean, she said 3 years, but I think every 6 months there's got to be a leapfrog change in terms of capabilities and trust which can be built within these tools. And so I think this momentum is accelerating, and I really think that we're in a good part of that journey to make this thing happen.
Well, Sri, it was a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much for all your time.
Thank you.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Agilisium Labs. Life Sciences DNA is a bi-monthly podcast produced by the Levine Media Group with production support from Fullview Media. Be sure to follow us on your preferred podcast platform. Music for this podcast is provided courtesy of the Jonah Levine Collective. We'd love to hear from you. Pop us a note at danny@levinemediagroup.com. For Life Sciences DNA, I'm Daniel Levine. Thanks for joining us.